AT&T has introduced a new innovation called personal levels of assurance. Anytime I talk about new innovations, I like to tell a story. So I'm going to tell you the story of Monique. Oh, and Monique's Android tablet, and the application that Monique likes to run on her Android tablet. Now Monique has a problem, and I think it's a problem that we all face. And that is, it seems like every time that she goes to click on something that she wants to do, she's asked to log in again, and again, and again, and again, and again. Now, that would be a pretty sad story if we stopped it right there. But it gets worse. Because if Monique doesn't have an account for this application or this website, well, she's hit with the internet version of the Spanish Inquisition. This is an actual registration card. I've stripped the name of the company off the top just to avoid any kind of embarrassment, but they're asking her for her social security number, and her date of birth, and her gender, and her street address. And Monique is wondering why so many websites and applications are asking more and more invasive questions about her private information. And we wondered the same thing. When we looked into it, we discovered a new way of handling the problem. And we introduced a new innovation called Personal Levels of Assurance, or PLOA. But rather than ask everybody to memorize yet another architectural diagram with squares and lines and circles, I'd rather tell you another story. This is the story behind the story. It's a story of Bob, and he's a developer, and he came up with a new idea for a service that he called Foo. And Bob wanted to make Foo available, well, to the entire world. So he deployed Foo out to a server in his company's data center and made it to where everybody in the entire world could access Foo. Now, these are Bob's friends. They represent the security, privacy, and legal concerns of the company, and they're not really happy right now because, well, everybody in the entire world can access Foo. And that exposes Bob's company to risk and liability. They're not going to be happy until there's a new enforcement point out in place. You can think of an enforcement point as a type of security gateway that prevents anybody from accessing Foo unless the right conditions are met. And once that's in place, they're happy. Now, this is Danny. She is an Android developer, and she read about Foo online and got really excited because she came up with a new idea for a client application that could call it. She could put the client application up for sale on the Android store, and when customers download it, she would make $1.99 per sale. And Monique just happened to download that application onto her Android tablet. I happen to be running that application right now on Monique's tablet, and here it is. So the real magic of this presentation is that Monique and every other customer, when they turn on their tablet or mobile devices, they already authenticate to their carrier. There's a handshake that happens to give them some sort of session so that they can communicate. Also, probably over time, they've entered their username and password for their identity provider and probably done that a number of times. So in this case, all the conditions are met for authentication and currently meet all the needs of the enforcement point in order to access Foo. So when I click Call Foo here, all the conditions are in place for this yellow line on this map to be exercised. I'm going to go ahead and click it now, and you see we got back Hello World. So the transaction went all the way through. And yes, just in case you're wondering, we actually deployed a service called Foo out onto a server in a data center, and we're protecting it with an enforcement point. So now everything's in place and Bob's company is happy, and they want to expand their customer base. To do so, they would like to reach out to an identity provider. You know, somebody like AT&T that's got millions of customers that they already have a relationship with. And for those identity providers that embrace PLOA, they bring a new asset to the table called a decision point. Now, a decision point lives right in the middle of all of the customers' profile data. For all those millions of customers, the decision point can answer very simple true-false questions like, did this particular customer validate their email address? Or have they ever agreed to a certain terms and conditions? The ability of the decision point to answer these true-false questions gives that enforcement point at Bob's company a new place to reach out to in the middle of a transaction. You can think of it as sort of a lifeline in the middle of a call, and it can say, hey, are these conditions there, true or false? Well, now that this is in place, here comes Bob's friends, the legal, privacy, and security team for his company, and they say, well, this is fantastic. You know what we'd like to do? We'd like to make sure that nobody accesses FOO unless they've validated their email address with somebody that we can trust. But instead of going and reaching out to Bob's team to change the server code, which may be the way that we would do it today, and that would cause client applications like Danny's client to break, with PLOA, they would instead reach out to the person that manages this data center's enforcement point. They would go to that person and say, hey, could you bring up the rules that protect FOO, and only FOO? We want to focus on that for a moment. We would like to make sure that nobody can access FOO unless they have validated their email address. I'm going to push this rule out into production, and I just did that. It took less than 1/10 of a second, and that rule is now in production. That means that from now on, any client application, regardless of when they authenticated, is going to have this additional request made to make sure that the email address has been validated. Now let's go back to Monique's tablet, which has already been authenticated. She's already had a session, and she's been using her application. When she clicks FOO this time, a request is made, and we get back an error because she has never validated her email address. Now you and I might not understand all of this code, but trust me, a user interface developer sees the 403 error 1,000 times a day. But with PLOA, we're not even going to ask the UI developer to solve this problem. Why? Because with PLOA, the identity providers bring another asset to the table. It's called the remedy service, which is a place where a customer can go to solve a problem. And because it's done in a standard way, we as a global community can develop a small snippet of code called a software developers kit that those UI developers can plug into their client. And once it's plugged in, the client can automatically reach out to that remedy point like another lifeline in the middle of a transaction. If we look down here, we'll see that Danny did include the SDK in her application. I've just had it turned off for the sake of the demonstration, but I'm going to switch it back on now. And watch this. Nothing up my sleeves, no smoke and mirrors. Without Monique having to re-authenticate, without her having to enter her username and password again, she's going to click Call FOO, and this time a totally different route is going to be exercised. She clicked Call FOO, and a dialog box popped up and said, hey Monique, you never validated your email address declaration with us, your identity provider. Now, for AT&T, the remedy point is hallowed ground. It's sacred ground. It's like a doctor-patient relationship or an attorney-client relationship. It's the IDP to end-user relationship. And you never want anybody standing between you and your IDP when you're talking about things like your social security number or your street address, really personal, confidential information. The way that Monique can have some assurances that this is a sidebar conversation with her IDP, well, it can be branded by that company. And she can see the URL of where this remedy point is being served up. But most importantly, when she gets that email, I'm going to go over here to her Yahoo account and I'm going to refresh it. And when she gets that email, she gets a branded email from her IDP that says, hey, Monique, we need you to take this code and just copy and paste it over here in this verification window, which I'm going to do. Now, when she clicks Verify Email, the control is passed back through the SDK again and back to the client that retries the call. And this happens without Monique having to click anything else. You saw that it said, thank you very much for securely confirming your email with us. The control was passed back to the application, which tried the call again, and this time successfully made it through, and we get back hello world. This means that over time, multiple clients can be released calling the FOO service for dozens or hundreds or even thousands of clients, and they can all use this way of solving their problems.